2919 East Broadway. This is the Jake Feinberg Show, and we're so happy to have you part of the program today. My show is dedicated to the ongoing true story of real music made by real musicians, with an emphasis placed on the 4 L's: leadership, love, life, and lineage. My guest today is one of the forefathers of America's only true art form. He was born in New Orleans, Louisiana, which in this host's opinion was one of 2 Meccas of African Roots music, the other being Harlem. Starting out on tenor saxophone, my guest switched over to the piano and began swinging with fellow contemporaries Cannonball and Nat Adderley, Al Hirt, Eddie Lee Charlton, and Ray Charles's horn leader David Fathead Newman. My guest didn't grow up inside the walls of academia. He developed his individual sound through live playing, 3 sets a night at some mafia-supported club. As Louis Armstrong used to say, without the Sicilians, there'd be no jazz in America. My guest's legacy goes beyond the music. He's father of 6 sons who grew up in an environment of total exposure. They heard the sounds of New Orleans. They saw the overt prejudice, and they saw the titans of this music counteract that bigotry by channeling their experiences through their instruments. His 2 most well-known sons, Branford and Wynton, are considered luminaries in melodic invention, both through their work at certain venues and education. Born in 1934, my guest came up playing modal music, often angular, at times rapping the ivory and simultaneously tickling it. Also, he's a listener, which is how real music is made. You listen to Bill Hayden or James Black or Jeff Tain Watts, and they're listening to him and playing mournful yet powerful notes, exploring the deep seas of their spirit in an attempt to elevate the consciousness of the listener and their creator. Live from New Orleans, Louisiana, Ellis Marsalis, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
You know, I couldn't ask anyone better here as I kick off my inaugural show. We recently lost the bassist Charlie Hayden, and I was hoping you could actually talk. Ironically enough, you actually started playing with his brother Bill, who introduced the bass to Charlie. I was just hoping you could talk about Charlie and Bill and your experiences with the Hayden family.
Well, first off, I never had much of an experience with the Hayden family at all. I met Charlie in the late 50s. He was, at the time, playing bass with Paul Bley and Lenny McBride, a drummer, and Dave Pike, who was a vibraphone player.
I love Dave Pike.
And this was at a club, the name of which escapes me, but I think that Paul had the only 6-night-a-week gig in the LA area that was playing jazz. And I was in the military at the time, which brought me to California. And I would go and hear them whenever I could. So eventually, Blay changed his personnel to an extent where Ornette Coleman and Don Cherry were playing the horns with him, and I think Billy Higgins was the drummer at the time. Charlie Hayden was still there with Paul Bley. And I would see them periodically, like I said, whenever I got a chance to come in, because I was stationed in Santa Ana, California. And so I got to kind of know them. But
what do you?
Eventually,
Yeah, go ahead. Continue.
But eventually, when my enlistment was up, I came back to New Orleans, and eventually got married and started having like kids. His brother, Charlie Hayden's brother, I met when I was on the Al Hirt band. This would have been in the late 60s, because we played in Sparks Nevada, and it was a house band, and his brother was in that band. And we talked a little about Charlie, because he said that Charlie used to, sing and dance, I think, with the family group. They came up sort of like country and western, I guess you might call it, and was saying how the family was surprised when Charlie left and went to Los Angeles and called back and told his people that he was playing jazz, which was kind of a surprise to them. But I only was around Bill a little because I would see him at night when it was time for the show at the John Squawker's Nugget. It was a gambling casino, the Nugget.
Nugget.
And Sparks was right outside of Reno. But
I want to.
I never really to know either of them really, really well. But I did see Charlie periodically, like if you are traveling to a certain extent as a musician, a jazz musician, you eventually run into some people that you know and maybe you haven't seen for a while.
Phone number 520-750-7456. If you want to be part of the program, we're talking to a legendary pianist, Ellis Marsalis. Ellis, you brought up Sparks, Nevada. I got a piece of music here. I got queued up for you. I'm not sure the last time you heard it. Why don't you take a listen to it, and we'll come back and talk about it. Well, while my engineer waits, yep. No, it's not. No. Okay. No, we'll just continue.
Hello.
Yeah. No, Ellis. Let me ask you a question. Can you talk a little bit about when you were coming of age in New Orleans? How the black community supported your music?
The black community, to the best of my knowledge, which included some HBCUs, historical black colleges and universities, was never a big supporter of jazz music. There's a lot of reasons for that. I mean, this may or may not be the format to discuss it in its entirety. But for the most part, there were exceptions, people like Alvin Batiste, who I met in elementary school, who became a great clarinetist and university professor at Southern University in Baton Rouge, which is about 80 or 90 miles outside of New Orleans. It's the state institution. And Harold Batiste, who was a mentor for me, he was about 3 years ahead of me in college at Dillard University. The faculty at Dillard University was not that supportive of jazz music. Our crosstown Catholic school was definitely not supportive of jazz music. And from people that I have met who attended other HBCUs, it was a case all around. Jazz was not supported within the framework of the black communities. And I think that there's a lot of sociological and historical reasons for that. But when it came down to it, we sort of nurtured each other.
One of the reasons
we played,
yeah, go ahead.
Whenever we could. The first group that sort of came out of the nurturing process, Edward Blackwell, who was a fantastic drummer, and recorded on the air AFO label, the local label of Harold Baptiste, before he left and went to New York. And Peter Beatty, who is still here today, Chuck Beatty is about 90 years old now. He and another bassist, Richard Payne, who has passed away, and Alvin Baptiste and Harold Baptiste, clarinet and tenor saxophone. And Harold had a vision which eventually led to us recording some of the original music that we were producing on the AFO label, and which exists today because of Harold's vision. But for the most part, it was all exceptions. When I say exceptions, what I mean is those of us who had jazz skills were usually the first people hired in these rhythm and blues clubs, because they didn't need somebody who could play those shuffles and boogies and what have you behind either singers or instrumentalists or what have you. And there were a lot of good musicians here who had to spend most of their time playing rhythm and blues, which I don't necessarily think was bad, but we never did get much support in the way of the creating music that emanated from rhythm and blues.
Mm-hmm.
And also from what would subsequently be called gospel music. Because early on, it wasn't really referred to as gospel music, but the content was the same. And the primary, what could I call it? The primary ingredients in the American jazz came from rhythm and blues, which was the secular music, and the gospel music, which was the sacred music. Hence, people who were involved in the creation of either and or both of those contributed to what ultimately became known as the groove. The whole concept of the groove came by way of danceable music.
When I talked to John Hendricks, he said that every time he would see Louis Armstrong or Dizzy or any of the cats from your generation, they'd be leaving, maybe not seeing each other for a while, and they'd say, "Don't forget about the blues. Don't forget about the blues." And to me, Ellis, it's like John Hendricks' evolution of the blues was a representation of the fact that music, what you just so eloquently described, came out of the church, but yet the black church at some point didn't want to accept that, which is why they never fully supported jazz. I was curious as to whether you think that the blues came out of the church and whether the church wants to even recognize that or ever has recognized that.
Well, I think that could easily become an oversimplification. First of all, when you say the church, mostly black people were Protestants. Now, I live in a city where there was a sizable contingency of people who were Catholics, and even went to all black Catholic schools from elementary school, and those who chose to go to Xavier University also was because of the segregation laws. This is where the opportunities were for more advanced education in after high school. And Xavier University was not friendly towards jazz music, and the students who went there was majoring in music. They had to tread very lightly in terms of that. Their Xavier University's track record lay primarily in training operatic singers, which 2 or 3 had careers as operatic singers. and also instrumentalists who eventually became a part of symphony orchestras. And basically, like I said, even from some people that I met that went to HBCUs elsewhere and one wasn't even from New Orleans, encountered the same kind of situation in terms of a lack of support of American music as it related to jazz. And the fact that an important ingredient in the music came from what is referred to as the black church, what needs to be recognized there is that there's under one umbrella, I think today, is called a Pentecostal.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the Pentecostal at one time was the Holy Rollers, the Sanctified Church, and maybe one or two other kind of sects, if you will. I remember going to a Sanctified Church in Summit, Mississippi with some of my older cousins in the 40s. I was very young, and the religious expression included a minister with a guitar singing, and some people with tamarines, and members of the congregation would get up and dance as a form of expression, a religious expression, which in some ways was probably as close as one would get to what happened in the bush country in Africa when there were people, there were dances that coincided with some spiritual aspects of what was taking place, as well as some secular. Now, these are like American terms. You know, you go to the bush country in Africa, they probably wouldn't even know what you're talking about.
No, because it's more of a feel. Actually, you just anticipated. Did you and Cannon and Nat, did you guys get over to Africa? When was the first time you went to Africa to play music?
I've never been to Africa.
Wow.
Much to my chagrin, I wish I had been. Alvin took his band at Southern University to Africa. And I remember Alvin, when he came back and we were talking about his experience, and when some of the African brothers asked him, he said, well, what do you do in America? He said, I teach music. And he says, why does one have to teach music? Because there's no parallel in the African culture for art. I mean, there are people who talk about jazz as an art form, and in reality, when you start to connect that to African music, there's no term for art in African culture, especially when you're talking about in the bush country, because everything in the bush country primarily is based upon the tribe and the expressions that's a part of their day-to-day lives. It's not compartmentalized, where we go sit in a concert hall and look at some people playing instruments, you know, that kind of thing. That's Western, which came primarily from Europe and evolved here in America.
Well, we have the tune queued up now, Ellis, so hang in there and take a listen. We'll come back and talk about it. Don't worry. one thing I didn't do. That was the one thing I didn't do. All good. I'll let you know. Afternoon sessions, August 17th, 1968, Sparks, Nevada. Ellis Marsalis on piano, Jim Hayden on bass, Chuck Foster on trumpet, John Pierce on alto sax, and Eddie Lee Charlton on drums. How'd that sound to your ear, brother?
Yeah, I just talked to Lee Charlton, man. Oh, man, maybe 2 days ago. Yeah, this is something that Lee Charlton sort of initiated.
I just want to read you part of. Yeah, let me just read you the liner notes. He says when he arrived in Sparks, Ellis had already lined up an afternoon session with members of Al's club band, including saxophonist John Pierce, trumpeter Chuck Foster, and bassist Jim Hayden. We gathered at John's pad. I set up my new Your tape recorder and 2 AKG 202 mics, and we spontaneously set Sparks afire. So please tell me your memories of that event.
No, these guys didn't really have anything to do with Al Hirt's band. See, Al Hirt was traveling at the time with an organ player, a piano player, tenor saxophone, and his clarinet, with him playing trumpet, and a drummer, who at the time, I think, when we were in Sparks, was named Freddie Staley. Most of the people that you name were people who I think Lee Charlton lined up, because there was a band at the Nugget who was a part of the show, because they had a show. They had a couple of elephants in the show, and I think they had some dancing girls, and Al band played also as a part of the show. But these guys were not in Al's band. I think I was probably the only one in Al's band who was on that particular session.
That's right. No, Lee was out in California. This is after you went cross country with Lee, which is just such a and so then he was in California. He knew you were in Al's band. He said, "Hey, I'll drive to Sparks." And when he got there, you already had this unit set up. But it's just, to me, I mean, Ellis, what I want you to talk about is how you personally, how do you create space within the music? We didn't listen to the next part of the solo, but you slow down, basically almost stop playing. You're just playing a couple chords, and then you go back into another solo. And in today's music, I hear a lot of ideas, a lot of frenetic playing, but I don't hear that kind of soul space. How do you create space within the music to get your ideas across?
Well, it depends on what you're playing and what everybody who's on the same page is trying to do. Like the piece that you just got to listen to is based on Impression, which is a piece by John Coltrane, which was John Coltrane's approach to Miles Davis's So What? Harmonically. That was the same thing. It's just faster. And John Coltrane created Impression. Now, I've heard a classical composition which sounds like it could very well be an inspiration for John Coltrane's performance of Impressions, but it was, I can't remember the name of it.
Mm-hmm.
But the harmonic structure of it moved like Impressions did. But for the most part, in every situation where a music evolves, and that which we call jazz evolved, well, jazz was the only American music that evolved anyway. The only music that was created on the shores of America that evolved. For example, if you listen to Joe King Oliver
Mm-hmm.
or Louis Armstrong, who was in Oliver's band, and Jelly Roll Morton, and whatever others that you can find that was playing, that was able to be recorded at that time. And it ultimately was being referred to as jazz music. Now you fast forward, and then you get the Basie Band, which had people in it like Lester Young, Herschel Evans, and numerous other people who, in some cases, like Sweet Ellison, who was in the band, but would later on become more prominent in smaller groups. Then you can hear bits and pieces here and there that contributed to the evolution of jazz. And nowadays, there are people who do not even appreciate the fact that some of this music was called jazz. I don't think that Duke Ellington was very fond of the term jazz, but I don't think that he would elevate his displeasure into some kind of verbal dispute or argument. But I think that what occurred was that the word jazz lost some of its ability to actually describe that evolutionary process that was taking place.
Why?
I mean, it was,
Why?
Well, I think basically jazz has always been great for the media. I mean, you take one word and stick it on somebody or something, and it takes care of whatever deadline that you have and whatever your editor wants you to come up with. But when it comes down to it, the music that we call jazz has yet to really be codified in such a way that all of the ingredients are identified in a way which is really a part of an academic process. When I say academic, what I mean is each component is a part of something that made a contribution. Essentially, the blues is a very important part of jazz. The media for expressing the blues as well as form is concerned, what we now call standards is a part of that whole process. And when John Coltrane started to adapt the modal approach to playing his music came out of an experience. I remember somebody told me back in the day, Coltrane used to walk the bars. And that was typical of some tenor players playing in rhythm and blues bands. And
You mean he would walk on the bar? He would walk on the bar itself playing?
Yeah.
Yeah, I love it.
I mean, that's what I was told.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I used to play tenor saxophone for a little while, and there was a club owner who asked me about doing that, which I just refused to do. I couldn't conceptualize that. So when he told me about walking a bar, I said, man, what is it? I don't even know what that is.
You know,
but,
no, I want to. You are just being so articulate about so much of the stuff that I care about. The Ellis 520-750-7456. If you want to be part of the program, we're talking to a legend in Ellis Marsalis, an amazing pianist. And could you talk about your relationship, if you had one, with a guy who was an important part of the blues scene in New Orleans, was Professor Longhair?
I never had a relationship with Fess. The first time that I heard Fess was at a dance, and Fess was playing acoustic piano, and the rhythms that he was using in the music that he was playing was astounding to me. And
why was it astounding to you?
Beg pardon?
Why was it astounding to you?
Essentially, because of his approach to it. Later on, as I began to learn more and more about music, period, I realized that some of what he was playing came out of stride piano and a lot of blues, and the articulating the music so that it became like dance music. And like I said, I eventually did kind of get to know Fess, but for the most part, I never really got to know him really, really well. There were people who were not only enamored of Fess, but also emulated him, like James Booker, and even before James, Alan Toussaint.
Mm-hmm.
Toussaint one time about Professor Longhair and recording him. And he said, man, whenever we get in the studio, Fess wouldn't really remember who Fess was. But there's a great video of three piano players, Professor Longhair, Pleasant, I can't think of his first name, they used to call him Papa Yellow. And I think Alan Toussaint was in there. And the title of it was Piano Players Never Really Played Together. But it was the first time that I had ever seen Professor Longhair take a lead approach in dealing with the music on this particular video, which I thought was very well done, considering what was asked of the person who was doing the video. Because in most cases, when it comes to videos and documentaries and things of that nature, the economic support usually comes from an area in which the vested interest of people in Hollywood and the larger viewership would be in consideration. So, to give you another example, when I was on faculty at University of New Orleans, one of my colleagues, Charles Blanc was in touch with a publisher who asked him if he would put together like a book about jazz music that could be presented to like a lay audience. When I say a lay audience, what I mean is that this is not a how to play jazz kind of book. It would have to do with the historical significance, where it started, so forth and so on. So I was on faculty, and Harold Batiste was also on faculty. And the three of us got together to create an outline. Now, the outline was to go to the publisher. Once we finished the outline, the publisher would send the outline to the prospective buyers. These were people who would be teaching somewhat of a, whatever they might call it, but it was sort of like jazz, like jazz history, if, for lack of a better term. So we put the outline together, sent it to the publisher, and the response came back after he sent it out to his prospective buyers at the various universities. And just about all of them said, if not the same thing, but close to it, that there was too much of New Orleans in that. Consequently, it became, well, this is not a good selling point. Now, Harold felt that what they were saying, that they wanted a book to come from me, mainly because of, like, whatever name recognition I had at this time, because this would have been in the late 80s, early 90s when we put this outline together. So I began to understand more and more about the connection between academia and books about any subject. And see, jazz, as we call it, has no academic history. So consequently, there are people who teach courses in jazz at different, in different institutions, different universities. And some people have sort of like a head start on other people who have not done it. So the references is going to be, well, what's the best book that we can get in order to teach one of these courses, like jazz history, or whatever the name would be used at the school. And the people who are out front with books that's out there, most of them would not be inclined towards including very much about New Orleans music. I mean, everybody pimps off of Louis Armstrong. I mean, that's an easy one. Some books you get, they'll have a picture of Louis Armstrong on the cover, and when you read it, you don't find much at all about Louis Armstrong, except in whatever book was written totally about him. I think Teach Out has got a book on Louis Armstrong. And as time goes on, I'm thinking that eventually more and more study about the music itself will emerge.
Well,
but until then,
right.
We just have to deal with whatever is out there.
Ellis, I could talk to you all afternoon, and there's a lot more questions I have to get to, but I'd like to invite you back on the program in the future for part two. It's just incredible to hear you articulate this. I want to talk to you about your experiences in the burlesque clubs in New Orleans and the Sicilians.
I had none. I had none.
Okay,
I'm going to tell you now.
Okay, none.
I saw a comment that was sort of taken out of context because of what I said in it. I mentioned something about playing and backing up strippers. In reality, the strippers in New Orleans were on Bourbon Street. Where I was playing, which was in segregated New Orleans, a club owner would get a young lady off the floor or wherever he got them and put them on stage, and they would do what was called a shake dance. It was not stripping, because in reality, stripping on Bourbon Street was like a profession. I mean, they were strippers who actually was doing this for a living over a period of time. In the black clubs, there were no strippers. There was, if you even had a show that included them, and you just play some blues or some piece, and they would just come up and maybe shake or whatever. But
okay, no, we will. I just want to, sir, I want to thank you for your time and helping me kick off my show here on 1210 AM Power Talk 1210, and we'll be in touch and we'll set up a part two. But thank you so much. You were just such a class act, and you've given us just so much great material. I can't thank you enough.
Okay.
Take care, brother.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.